from the Economics Department at Augustana College. And to say that I am pleased and honored to introduce this morning's symposium keynote speaker is a vast understatement. Dr. Stephanie Kelton is one of the nation's most important economists, not only for what she has already achieved, but what she and the department she leads is striving to achieve. Her economics, the theory and policy proposals emanating from the University of Missouri, Kansas City, sometimes referred to as the UMKC School, where she serves as chair of the department, never wanders far from its purpose of improving the human condition. Stephanie Kelton is an associate professor and chair of the Department of Economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. She received her bachelor's degree in business administration and economics from the California State University's Sacramento. Her master's degree is from Cambridge University, and a PhD in economics from the New School for Social Research. Dr. Kelton also serves as the editor-in-chief of the top-ranked blog New Economic Perspectives, and as a research associate with the prestigious Levy Economic Institute of Bard College in New York. In the last few months, she's given presentations at Columbia University, at Harvard University, and at next month, she'll be at Berkeley University. I like that, right? Columbia, Harvard, Augustana College, Berkeley. I like it. So Dr. Kelton is an expert in the areas of Federal Reserve operations, fiscal policy, Social Security, healthcare, international finance, and employment policy. Her writings have been published in countless books, journals, encyclopedias, and magazines. These publications have been reprinted. They've been cited by scholars from around the world, including policymakers at the Bank of England. Sorry, it's kind of an ongoing joke. At the Bank of England, Bulgarian National Bank. Her work is required reading at Harvard School of Law, and of particular note is her book, The State, the Market, and the Euro, that was published in 2001, that accurately predicted and explained the debt crisis in the Eurozone. When she isn't teaching, doing academic research, or blogging, Stephanie consults with policymakers, investment bankers, and portfolio managers across the globe. She is a regular commentator on national radio and broadcast television. Perhaps you've seen her on Up or All In, the Chris Hayes show on MSNBC. She is a regular, and she's an acclaimed educator. She's a highly praised public speaker, a wife, and a mother. All the way from Lawrence, Kansas, please give an enthusiastic Augustana College welcome to Dr. Stephanie Kelton.
Thank you very much. Can everybody in the back hear? Okay, good. So, well, first of all, thank you very much for coming out at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, of all things, young college students. Very much appreciate the opportunity to come, and Dr. Nesbitt has been wonderful. I've enjoyed my time here. So let's just get started. And I know we're on a Saturday here, so I'm not going to take a whole bunch of your time, but I want to kind of introduce you to some ideas that I hope will come to you as very new. I think that they will. These are not sort of mainstream ideas. They're not the sort of thing you open up the newspaper or Business Week or the Wall Street Journal or turn on the TV and hear folks talking the way that I'm going to talk to you for the next 45 minutes or so. Okay, but I think they're really important issues, and I think it's important that more people begin to talk about these issues the way that I'm going to talk about them with you this morning, because they have huge consequences for the kind of economy that we're going to have, the kind of job market that you're going to enter, the kind of world you're going to live in and perhaps raise your children in. And so let's just jump right in, okay? How many of you suffer from a terrible affliction known as pneumophobia? Anybody here suffer from pneumophobia? It's a terrible disease. It's sweeping the nation. It's the fear of very large negative numbers. And lots of people suffer from it. When we hear about things like the national debt or governments running deficits, it makes us feel uncomfortable. We don't like that. It sounds like something we should stop doing. Right? There's a negative connotation associated with a government deficit and with the government debt. And we are bombarded on a daily basis with warnings, dire warnings about what's going to happen to this nation if we don't begin to get our fiscal house in order, if we don't start reining in spending, if we don't start paying down the debt, why the children of the future will be burdened for generations to come. We're leaving them and this is fiscally irresponsible, and we need to stop now, right? Anybody heard that? All day, every day, all the time. That is the conventional wisdom. It comes from every side of the political divide, right? Both parties reinforce these sorts of ideas. And what I want to do is talk to you in a way that attempts to lower the temperature in the room when we talk about things like government debt and deficits, and get you to see and think about these things in a different way, okay? So what is it that we really want from an economy? What do you all want? I'm guessing that you're like most Americans. And as you're young people in college, I'm guessing that you want to graduate one day and enter the job market in a strong economy, where you can get a job quickly, a good paying job, and have security and opportunities for advancement, to build wealth, and so forth, right? You want to be part of a strong middle class, or perhaps start your own business and be upper middle class, or maybe even beyond, right? You want opportunities, economic opportunities. You want to inherit a planet that is hospitable, that is sustainable. You want a secure retirement. You don't want to worry about what's going to happen when you finish your working career and you retire, and how are you going to live, how are you going to survive? Will you have the money that you need to get by on in retirement? You want a good society. This is how John Kenneth Galbraith referred to it in a book he titled The Good Society. These are the sorts of things we aspire to. What we want is an economy that works for all of us. We want an economy that runs at the right temperature. Not too hot, because if you're overheating your economy, you get what? Inflation. Not too cold, because if your economy is weak and not producing enough jobs, you get high unemployment. So we want an economy that works for all of us, not too hot, not too cold, just right, the Goldilocks scenario. We want an economy where jobs are plentiful, where there is an opportunity for people who want to work and contribute to society to find gainful employment. When you enter the job market and you become a job seeker, we would like an economy that has a job vacancy for you. What we have today is not an economy that is producing jobs for everyone who wants to work. Right? We have, in fact, about 24 million Americans who want full-time work in this country today, and they can't find it. Why? Because there are only about 4 million job openings. 24 million people who want full-time work, 4 million jobs available. That's a problem. It's a fundamental structural problem in our labor market, but it's a problem we're creating by virtue of the policies that we're putting in place. We are creating this problem, and we can fix this problem. We want an economy that produces at its potential, that produces as much income as it is possible for us to produce. What this graph shows is a blue line that shows the trajectory that we were on before the economy melted down, before Lehman Brothers collapsed, before the financial crisis, and then the Great Recession. We were on the blue line. That was our real GDP. That's how much stuff we would have been producing if we didn't have the Great Recession. It was our national income trajectory, but we got knocked off that blue line because we had a bad recession, and we ended up on that red line. That's our actual income. And the difference between where we are, the red line, and where we could have been, the blue line, is the lost income and the lost output, and it adds up and accumulates and compounds every day we don't correct it, and already we've lost trillions and trillions of dollars in income, savings, wealth, profits. It's gone forever. We can never go back and get it. We can't rewind the clock. It's gone. And it continues to compound. We're losing. So what's the problem? The problem is we don't get the economic policy right. The problem is that we have two political parties arguing, for all intents and purposes, we have two political parties, right? Arguing with one another. One side is absolutely convinced that we have a spending problem in this country. Okay? And by that they mean we're spending too much. The other side says, no, we don't have a spending problem. What we have is a revenue problem. And they mean we're not collecting enough revenue. Okay? So they fight over whether to cut spending or raise taxes and by how much. And Meanwhile, they're both effectively fighting for the same thing, which is smaller deficits, which is a balanced budget. They both want to achieve that. They just want to get there in different ways. But they both fundamentally agree that deficits are bad and that balanced budgets are preferable. And that's what we should be striving to achieve. And when we hear that from a politician or a pundit on TV, the government ought to live within its means, not spend more than it takes in, be fiscally responsible, we accept that because it seems to make sense to us, right? Because the finances that we're most familiar with are our own. And we know that it's impossible for us as individuals to spend more than our income year after year after year, to borrow, to spend, to finance things, on and on and on forever. We know we can't do that. We know we have to live within our means, that we can only spend what we are able to earn or what we can borrow. And we know that if we borrow too much, we can get into trouble with debt. We've seen people, right, miss a credit card payment, have their credit card taken away, a small business owner who struggles to get by and has to declare bankruptcy. We see it happen in the real world. So we think it's good to save, spending less is good, and paying down debt is great. So we go to personal investment websites. Say, give me some investment advice. What do they tell you to do? Exactly these things. Balance your budget. Control the urge to spend and pay down your debt. We're bombarded with this kind of thing. And it makes sense. And in fact, it's great advice for the individual. It's great advice. But it's catastrophic advice if everyone in the economy tries to follow the advice at the same time. Then it destroys the economy. Why is that? This guy right here is Paul McCulley. Paul McCulley was the #2 at PIMCO. PIMCO, largest bond fund in the world, right, investor. Paul McCulley understands this perfectly well. So here he is in an interview, and he says saving is good individually, but collectively, when we all do it at the same time, it kills income. Paying off debt, deleveraging, paying down debt, trying to save more, is also great advice for the individual, but if we all try to do it at the same time, it kills the economy. Why is that? Because capitalism runs on sales. It's the most simple way to describe economics. 3 words. Capitalism runs, in 4 words, on sales. 4 words. Capitalism runs on sales. What do I mean? Spending creates income. One person's spending is another person's income. Whoever's doing the spending on the other side is someone who is receiving that payment, and it is income to them. Spending creates income, and income leads to sales. As your income goes up over your course of your life, your spending will go up. Higher income leads to higher spending, and higher spending, sales, lead to jobs. Because when businesses are swamped with customers and demand for the things they produce is high, they hire more workers, they order more supplies, they build more, they invest in more capital, right? Spending creates income, income leads to sales, and sales create jobs. So the way the economy works is dynamic and it's messy, right? We've got all these different players in the economy. We have households who work and earn wages and salaries. We have businesses who hire them and pay them to do work for them and produce goods and services that some households buy back from those businesses, right? So we're producing things for the purpose of selling things, for the purpose of making a profit. That is capitalism. You don't have a successful capitalist economy unless you have robust demand for the goods and services that businesses are producing. You've got to have enough customers with income that they are spending buying back the goods and services being produced. Okay, the problem is that not all of the income that we earn gets spent buying goods and services that are produced by firms in the US. Some of the income that we earn, we save instead of spending. And every dollar that you've saved that stays in your wallet or stays in your bank account is a dollar that some firm doesn't capture in the form of a sale. So their output doesn't get sold, so they can't get the revenue, and they don't get the profits that might come from that. So saving is what we refer to as a leakage. It leaves that big circle of spending. But taxes are another form of leakage. Every dollar that is taxed away from you by government is a dollar that you can't use to buy some good or service that's been produced by some firm in the economy. So taxes are a leakage. And finally, every dollar you spend buying goods and services that were produced in some other part of the world, you're importing those goods, is a dollar that doesn't get captured by some domestic firm here in the US. So imports are a leakage. So you've got dollars leaking out. The question is there anything happening to offset those leakages? If not, then all of the output doesn't get sold, and businesses will produce fewer goods and services in the next period. The economy will contract, will produce less. But there are ways to offset those leakages, and the ways to offset those leakages are through other spending injections. And those injections can come from three places. People in other parts of the world buy stuff that we produce. We export things to them. And when they buy our goods and services, it's a form of spending injection into our economy. When the government buys goods and services produced here, it's a form of spending injection into the economy. Government orders aircraft carriers to be built by a US firm. Boom, it's a spending injection into the US economy, right? And when businesses invest in new capital equipment, build new factories, buy new software, it's an injection into the US economy. It's a spending injection. So economics is about calibrating these flows, these leakages and these injections. And I like to use this little illustration of this bathtub because what you really want is an economy where the water in the bathtub is at the right level. And your leakages are the stuff that goes out your drain. And your injections are the stuff that comes in through the faucet. And what you want to do, if the water level is too low, it means you don't have enough jobs, demand is weak, the economy's not at full employment, then you put more water in through the faucet, or you slow the water down through the drain. So one way to do that would be to add some water by more government spending. G goes up, more water comes in. Another way to do that would be to cut taxes. So less water goes down the drain and the water in the bathtub rises. Hey, how much do you increase spending? How much do you cut taxes? Enough to get to full employment, but not so much that the water overflows the tub and you get inflation. Right? You want the water at the right level. And that's the goal of economics. It's calibrating these flows and recognizing that unemployment exists because of a shortfall in total demand, total spending in the economy. So, how do we get to full employment? Right now, we are not at full employment. I just showed you that there are 24 million Americans looking for full-time work and 4 million job vacancies. We are not at full employment. We're not even close. How do you get to full employment? Well, you have to have more spending, because that's what GDP is, right? Our economy is measured by our gross domestic product, and that is a measure of how much money we spend buying the goods and services that are produced. Where's the spending going to come from? It can only come from three places. It can come from your domestic private sector, your domestic public sector, or the rest of the world. And it can't come from anywhere else, because that's all there is, right? Households and firms, government, foreigners. That's it. So we've got to have more spending, but we're totally focused and fixated and obsessed with balancing the budget. And balancing the budget means higher tax revenue, lower spending, both of which reduce income, which reduces sales, which kills jobs. And we're obsessed with this. And we've got, at any point in time when they do the polling, as many as 95% of Americans could say that they agree that the deficit is a problem. We ought to be doing something about it. So we have all these things that we think are true that aren't true. The first and most important is that the government is just like a great big household. Got to play by the same set of rules that we play by. We hear it all the time. Politicians love to use this line. Right? Government is like a household or a private business. It can temporarily spend more than it takes in tax revenue, but only if it can borrow someone else's money. It's got to be able to borrow dollars from somewhere. It's got to be able to get dollars on affordable terms at low enough interest rates that it can afford to pay back the debt. And look, there's only so much money out there available to be loaned out. Money is finite. There's only so much of it. And so we all have to compete for this limited pool of money, and the more intense the competition, the higher the interest rate you're going to have to pay. Next thing you know, interest rates begin to spike. Now solvency becomes an issue. Do you have too much debt? Right? Do any of you know the famous study, now infamous study by two Harvard economists named Reinhardt and Rogoff? You've heard about this? So these two Harvard economists wrote a book, they did lots of papers, and they argued that there was this thing called a tipping point, and that when countries allow their debt to get too high, and for them that was 90% of your total GDP, well, that was a tipping point. And if you go over 90% debt level relative to the size of your economy begins to slow down, growth slows, unemployment goes up, and you get bad outcomes, right? So the idea that there's this fine line between what's sustainable and what's not sustainable, and there are tipping points out there. Listen, if your debt gets too high, your creditors start to worry. S&P, right? Fitch, Moody's, they'll downgrade your debt. And if they downgrade your debt, your borrowing costs go up. And if your borrowing costs go up, well, heck, you could end up just like Greece. How many people have turned on the TV and heard some talking head say, we got to get our fiscal house in order, the debt is crushing our grandchildren, we're going to end up like Greece, and right, we're going to end up like Greece is always the last sentence in the story. We think, most Americans think, that this can literally happen, that our government can literally run out of money. It can go broke. President Obama said as much in an interview on 60 Minutes with Scott Pelley. Pelley asked him, at what point does the US run out of money? He said, we're out of money now. And we think this can happen to us. And it scares us to think of our nation as bankrupt. So we turn to Mark Twain, who said, listen, sometimes it's just easier to fool people than to convince them that they have been fooled. And I'm here to tell you that we have been fooled. We have been fooled. And it is hard to unfool people when we are bombarded from every direction with the story that we're going broke and government's like a household and all that kind of stuff. It's hard. Most people don't understand how money works in the economy, where money comes from. They see the government deficit as a negative thing. That's how they see it. They see our national debt as a huge problem, a threat maybe to our national security. This is what they see. What do you see? What do you see? A what?
2 people or a candle holder.
2 people or a candle holder. 2 vases or a vase, I don't know. The point is, it's about perspective. And there can be different ways to look at something. And I'm going to argue that there's another way to look at deficit that most of us don't see. And it turns out it's really important to look at it in a different way, from a different vantage point. And we, as economists, have done a terrible disservice to the nation as a whole, really, because we educate people, we talk on TV shows, we write books and articles, and we haven't recognized that the nature of the monetary system in the US today is fundamentally different from one that existed 100 years ago. Different from one that existed 60 years ago. We aren't on a gold standard anymore. But we talk and we prescribe policy and we write research papers and textbooks as if we're still living in a gold standard world. We do flat earth economics and we haven't had our Copernicus moment, okay? And it's time for the Copernican moment. It's a mistake that's costing us, as I said earlier, trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. So what is it that we're missing? Well, this is a quote from the St. Louis Federal Reserve research staff at St. Louis Fed. And what they say in the opening sentence is really important and instructive, okay? They say, as the sole manufacturer of US dollars, whose debt is denominated in dollars, the US government can never become insolvent. can never become Uncle Sam with the empty pockets. But the first few words are really important. As the sole manufacturer of dollars, what is the word that you use in economics to describe the sole manufacturer of something?
Monopoly.
A monopolist. The US government has a monopoly on the creation of the US dollar. It is the issuer of the dollar. The US dollar literally cannot come from anywhere else. The US government is the sole creator of the currency called the US dollar, and therefore can never run out. Can you run out of something when you are the sole creator of that thing? No, you cannot, right? Literally never run out of its own currency, and therefore become Greece. This is what the St. Louis Fed is saying. But I'm going to give you more evidence. This is Alan Greenspan. Now, it's super important. I'm going to play a little video clip. It's about a minute long. But for young people especially, how many of you think that Social Security is going to be there for you when you need it, when you retire? How many think it's going to be there? I'm seeing 3 hands in a big room full of lots of young folks, maybe 5. Okay, that's pretty astonishing. I want you to listen carefully to this, okay? Matters most.
So having personal retirement accounts is another way of making future retiree benefits more secure for their retirement. And also, do you believe that personal retirement accounts as a component to a system of solvency does help improve solvency? Because when you have a personal retirement account policy, it is accompanied with a benefit offset. With that feature in place, do you believe that personal retirement accounts can help us achieve solvency for the system and make those future retiree benefits more secure?
Well, I wouldn't say that the pay-as-you-go benefits are insecure in the sense that well, there's nothing to prevent the federal government from creating as much money as it wants and paying it to somebody. The question is, how do you set up a system which assures that the real assets are created which those benefits are employed to purchase? So it's not a question of security, it's a question of the structure of the financial system which assures that the real resources are created for retirement, as distinct from the cash. The cash itself is nice to have, but it's got to be in the context of the real resources being created at the time those benefits are paid, so that you can purchase real resources with the benefits, which of course are cash.
Okay. Greenspan's not maybe the clearest character on the planet, so let me decode what he says. So Paul Ryan, Congressman Ryan, asks Alan Greenspan, who by the way is under oath, don't you think it's time to begin to move toward a system of personal savings accounts? That means Social Security goes to Wall Street, not the system that we have today where your future benefit payments are guaranteed by government, right? And there's a formula that tells you how much you're going to get when you retire. Because we all know Social Security is unsustainable and it's going broke and so forth. And Greenspan leans into the microphone and says, well, I wouldn't call it unsustainable. There's nothing to prevent the federal government from creating all the money it wants and paying it out to someone. We are the monopoly issuer of the dollar, after all. The question is, will the real resources be there in the future? Will we be a productive enough society so that when we mail those checks in the future to retirees, their dependents, the disabled, and those checks go out and people put them to work, go out and try to buy stuff, will we have a productive enough economy that everybody can buy what they want without driving up prices, without causing inflation? That is the only thing that matters. It is not about whether the government can afford to keep its promise to you, to me, and to everyone else who is obligated, who they are obligated to make these benefit payments to. They can always write the check. This is what he's saying. The question is, are we doing the things today that will make us a productive economy in the future? Are we investing in our young people? Are we investing in our infrastructure? Are we investing in research and development to give new technologies that will raise productivity in the future? Are we doing those things? that will allow us to be a productive society in the future so that we can keep our promises and not have inflation. That is the bottom line. And nobody tells you that. They tell you the thing is going broke and they can't afford to pay. And they're going to have to redesign it and throw the thing to Wall Street or reduce your benefits by a third or whatever the heck it is, but they make it about the financial stuff, which it is not about. It is about the real economy. So we have been fooled. We've been fooled because we act like we're still on a gold standard, and we think the constraints that exist when you're on a gold standard exist when you're off a gold standard, and they don't. The policy space is much bigger. You can do things off of a gold standard that you can't do when you're on a gold standard. We think we run out of money. We think somehow the Chinese are our bankers, that dollars come from China, and when China decides to stop supporting us, then we all have to live in poverty, and we're vulnerable to this, and the bond rating agencies can attack us, and the bond vigilantes can come after us, and we're going to end up like Greece, or we're going to hyperinflate like Zimbabwe, or it's fear. We're afraid of all of these sorts of things. And we're afraid because we don't understand our own monetary system. We don't understand that in 1971, President Richard Nixon took the US off the gold standard. And that fundamentally changed the game. It opened up policy space that wasn't available when the dollar was tied to gold, but it is available now. We just forgot to rewrite the textbooks. We forgot to change the story. And so we behave as if we're on the old system, and we're not on the old system. And it's costing us trillions of dollars and human suffering. Right? We never had a debt crisis. Every night TV would start off with the 6 o'clock news and the dark, scary music, dun, 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 the debt crisis in America. And I would sit there and go, no, there's no debt crisis in America. But it was just asserted, and people said, oh yeah, we have a debt crisis. Right? The truth of the matter is we need the federal government to run deficits most of the time. Most of the time. Okay, that's the most controversial thing I'm going to say today, so I'm going to spend the rest of the time defending it. It doesn't sound fiscally responsible for an economist to say we need the government to run deficits most of the time, does it? These guys don't think it's fiscally responsible, right? The deficit hawks, they want the budget in balance all the time. They'd like a constitutional amendment to require that the budget be balanced, so the government never spends a penny more than it takes in taxes. But then you have another group, right? These are the kinder, gentler deficit birds, known as the deficit doves, who are really just deficit apologists. And they say things like, well, it's true that deficits are, undesirable, and we really prefer not to have them, but sometimes the economy is just so darn weak that we need a little bit of deficit spending to kind of help give it a little push. But then when the economy recovers, we'll start running surpluses, we promise, and those surpluses will offset the deficits we ran in the weak years, and so overall you get a balanced budget over the course of the cycle. So they really want the same thing as the deficit hawks, they just don't want to go as fast to get there, right? But they fundamentally support the same thing. What would an owl say? Hey, forget the hawks and the doves, let's pick a different bird. Because owls, as you know, are wise. They see things other people don't see. They can see in the dark, and their little heads go all the way around. So they see stuff that other people aren't seeing. So what would an owl say? And this is where I want to introduce you to this Kansas City approach that Dr. Nessler referred to, or what's sometimes been dubbed modern money theory in the press. This is a different way to think about money, deficits, and debt in the modern economy. Okay, there's a little picture here in the bottom corner that I tweeted out years ago, and a couple of days after I tweeted out this picture, it showed up in the Financial Times with an article about our approach. And the person who wrote the article for the FT said, this is a really different way to look at and think about the role of government deficits in the economy. But once you begin to see it, she said, it's like an autostereogram. So I looked it up. An autostereogram is one of those pictures with the speckled dots and the wavy lines, and it doesn't look like anything, but if you kind of focus on it for a little bit, suddenly the picture becomes clear. She says, looking at deficits this way is like that. Once it becomes clear, it flips a switch in your brain and you can never unsee it. You can never look at the deficit the same way again. Okay, so let me tell you how an owl looks at the deficit. But first, my disclaimer, because I do this a lot, and I'll give a talk and then I'll leave, and then people will whisper, I can't believe she said deficits don't matter. Wait a minute, I didn't say that. I said deficits matter, but not in the way most people think. I can't believe she said the government should just keep spending until we get to full employment. No, I didn't say that. But I did say that unemployment is evidence of a deficit that's too small. I can't believe she said we can print our way to prosperity. I didn't say that. I just said we can have a much more prosperous economy. I can't believe she said there's no limit to government spending. No, again, I didn't say that. I said the relevant constraint on government is not financial. It's on the real side. It's on the asset side, the real resources. It's an inflation constraint, not a financial constraint. Okay, so with that in mind, let's talk about this goal of reducing the deficit. Should we be supporting the drive by both sides of the political aisle to achieve smaller deficits? Okay? We had the Simpson-Bowles Commission, which was appointed by President Obama, and they were given the task of coming up with a plan to reduce our country's deficits. And they came up with a plan. And they said, listen, here it is, do this, and deficits will come down by more than $4 trillion over the next 10 years. So we had this plan, right? And then we had the fiscal cliff drama. And what we had was, we were approaching the fiscal cliff at the end of 2012, and everybody was getting nervous because the fiscal cliff meant that spending was going to drop off and taxes were going to go up. And so we were going to reduce the deficit sharply and quickly, like it was going to fall by a lot and really fast. And agencies like the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, put out these warnings and these studies, and they said, listen, if you guys do this, you know, you risk putting the economy back in recession because we still have a pretty weak economy. Maybe you don't want to go full bore and reduce the deficit along this blue line because you're going to go from a deficit of 8 or 9% of GDP all the way down to a deficit of like 2% of GDP in a matter of 3 years or so. It's too much, right? Maybe you want to reconsider. Maybe this brown line is a better way to go. So they had an alternative scenario. Simpson-Bowles was the green line. The Center on Budget and Policy Priorities had this idea that you should just have deficits of 2.5% all the time and that's it, forget about it. So it was like, oh my gosh, which one? Do I want the blue line? Do I want the brown line? Do I want what's behind door number 3? I don't know which of these things I should be supporting. Well, what would an owl say? How would an owl answer this question? So let me introduce you to this graph that appeared in the Financial Times. And this is the one that helps flip the switch for people and change the way they think about the deficit. The deficit cannot be thought of as a single number on a single ledger with a minus sign in front of it. Right? It's a number, and it's got a negative sign. It's bad. That's not in context. You have to consider the deficit in the proper context. So in the context of what's happening in the economy as a whole. So real quickly, and very generally, what this picture shows is anything above 0 is a surplus, anything below 0 is a deficit. And this divides the economy up into 3 simple pieces. The private sector here at home, the government sector here at home, and everybody else in the world, the foreign sector. Okay? The public sector, government, is what you see here in red. The private sector is what you see here in blue. And the rest of the world is what you see in green. And anytime somebody is below 0, they are spending more than they are taking in, spending more than their income, right? So what do you notice about the graph? First thing, it's a perfect mirror image. Collapse the top onto the bottom, it would match up exactly. Why? Because it just comes from an accounting identity. Balance sheets have to balance. So what goes out of one sector lands in some other sector in the same size and the same magnitude, okay? So what it says is that if the government is running a deficit of, let's say, 5% of GDP, And the rest of the world is also running a deficit, which would mean the rest of the world is buying more from us than we're buying from them. Think of it as a trade deficit on their part. So the rest of the world has a deficit, and the government has a deficit, and the sum of those two show up as your surplus, as your private sector surplus. So when we think of fiscal responsibility, we tend to think of governments balancing their budgets or running surpluses. Okay, that's what happened when Clinton was president. Right here, for the first time in generations, the government ran surpluses. Right? Late 90s and early 2000s, we had government surpluses. And this was widely considered great news. What a sign of fiscal responsibility. Finally, somebody in the White House who knows how to balance the budget. Right? Democrats love this, it's their badge of honor. We were the party that brought you the last balanced budgets and surpluses and so forth, and then Bush came and squandered it. This is like, right? It shows that we did good work running these surpluses, except that when the government ran a surplus, it meant what? It meant they were going like this more than they were going like this. And they were taking more out of the economy in the form of taxes than they were putting back in the form of spending. That gets labeled as surplus. So the government is in surplus, the rest of the world is in surplus now because we're the ones running trade deficits. So you take the government surplus and add it to the surpluses the rest of the world is running, and you get record and massive and unsustainable private sector deficits in this country. Look, the private sector is always up here in surplus, but not during that period. We spent more than our income as a whole, right? Private sector, year after year after year after year, and we did it how? Through debt, through leverage. We borrowed and spent, right? And it was unsustainable. And it ended in a recession, and the government's budget moved back into deficit, and then we had a housing bubble. And we said, excellent, look at the equity in my home. I can borrow against this. I can put my kid through school. I can buy a second home and get a boat or a pair of jet skis or whatever, right? I have money. And so we leveraged up again. And here we were, right back in the same situation, spending more than our income. Now we did this for a pretty long period of time, and it ended very, very badly. It ended with the Great Recession, right? We had the worst recession since the Great Depression. And so what happens when you get a deep and big recession? Well, government deficits explode. Because when people are losing their jobs, no job, no income, you don't pay income taxes. But you do qualify for unemployment compensation and maybe food stamps and maybe other forms of public assistance. So taxes go down and spending to support the unemployed goes up and your deficit balloons. And that's what happened because the economy got so bad. Those deficits got huge. 10, 11% of GDP, and people freaked out. What in the world? This is horrible. These deficits are out of control, except that those huge deficits are what allowed the private sector to achieve those huge surpluses. Put the private sector back above zero, back where they belong, right? So when we focus on reducing deficits or balancing budgets, we have to figure out that when we move one part of this picture, some other part's going to move too, right? And reducing government deficits means reducing non-government surpluses. So look at the picture again. Somebody comes up to you and says, we have a plan to reduce the deficit. We're going to either do it quickly and follow the blue line, or we're going to do it more slowly and follow the brown line. Which one do you want? Flip your switch. Turn it around. Turn it upside down. Now it's no longer the government deficit, it's the non-government surplus. Ask yourself the question, how would you like to reduce the non-government surplus? Would you like to do it all at once and follow the blue line, or would you like to do it more slowly, or would you like to just reconsider the question altogether? Because maybe you aren't so much in favor of reducing the non-government surplus. Okay, so this is simply a matter of accounting. Government deficits mean the government goes like this, more than it goes like this. If it spends 100 and only collects 90, the 10 goes somewhere. And where it goes is into the non-government sector. Okay? There, Reading is our lacking, their deficit is our surplus. And that's the way to look at the deficit that almost nobody ever bothers to tell us. So right now, deficits are falling rapidly. They're falling at the fastest pace since the end of World War II. Right now in the United States of America, the deficit is absolutely collapsing. Deficits have fallen by 48% since 2009, cut in half, which is the same as saying non-government surpluses have been cut in half since 2009. It's the same sentence, just said differently. We're cutting surpluses when we're cutting deficits. How big does the deficit need to be? It needs to be at least as big as the green, because if there isn't enough red down here to offset the green up here, then the blue will be down here. Bottom line. It's not to say that the private sector can never run deficits. They can and they do and they have, but it is to say that it's not a sustainable thing. Private sector can't spend more than its income, leveraging period after period after period. The government can. Who gets this? Well, Fidelity gets it. Fidelity was so worried that we were going to go over the fiscal cliff and the deficit was going to fall too much too soon that they started putting out things like this. We have a threat to corporate profits on our hands. A threat to corporate profits? What's wrong? The government's deficit is a source of corporate profits, and private saving takes away from corporate profits. I told you, every dollar that you save instead of spend is a dollar that doesn't buy some good or service, can't become a firm's revenue, and can't become ultimately part of its profit. So Fidelity got it. They understood that when the crisis happened and the private sector started spending a lot less, that government deficits lifted their profits. And they say they fostered a quick recovery in profits because deficits went up so much, right? So what most people fail to see is this relationship between the government deficit and the private sector's surplus. Here I've eliminated the foreign sector just to draw the distinction between the two and the way they move. Okay, so when the government deficit gets big, the private sector surplus gets big. And if we start reducing government deficits, as we are now, we are simultaneously reducing private sector surpluses. Okay, but what about the money? How do we pay for this? Is this really sustainable? Here's Ben Bernanke in an interview with Scott Pelley, again on 60 Minutes. Scott Pelley says to him, listen, what are you guys doing? I mean, we're spending a lot of money, you know, on bailing out everybody and trying to fix the economy. Where's all this money coming from? Is it taxpayer money? And Bernanke says, and I quote, it's not tax money. We just use the computer to mark up the size of someone's account. What? We use the computer. This is the age of modern money. And so governments spend, not by physically printing money, but by sending instructions to credit someone's bank account, right? That's how government spending takes place in the modern era. We are not on a gold standard. The government's not like a household. It's not revenue constrained. Bernanke has said so. Greenspan told you. The St. Louis Fed told you. If the real resources are there, the financial resources can always be made available. But we don't understand it, and it scares us. We're afraid of inflation, afraid of China. We're afraid of the bond vigilantes, interest rates going up, afraid of becoming Greece. We're afraid of debt and deficits. We're not going to have hyperinflation. Hyperinflation has only occurred 56 times in the history of the world, according to research done by two economists at the Cato Institute, Libertarian Cato Institute study. 3-year-long study, they found 56 instances of hyperinflation anywhere in the world, and not a single episode ever in any country with a democracy and a stable government trying to achieve full employment. You get hyperinflation because you have wars and political upheaval, regime collapse, you have supply side crises where your crops fail, you have something else going on, you lose a war. You don't get hyperinflation because you're trying to run your economy at full employment. What does drive inflation? These are inflation rates around the world. and this is a commodity price index. Movements in the price of inputs matters a lot, especially oil. Oil is a huge driver of inflation. Printing money doesn't do it. If it did, Japan would have hyperinflated 20 years ago, and the US would be well on its way to hyperinflation now because of helicopter ban and all the money printing the Fed has done and so forth. It's not that easy to generate inflation. China is not our banker, and we don't depend upon China to get US dollars. China has dollars because China produces and sells us lots of cheap stuff. And in exchange for that cheap stuff, they get dollars, which they hold in a checking account at the Federal Reserve. Okay, that's how they get the dollars. But then they say, well, I don't want to hold my money in a checking account. I want to hold it in a savings account. And so they buy a US Treasury, which is why people say China holds so much US debt, because they'd rather have it in their savings account than in their checking account. Meanwhile, the real goods and services are flowing to us, and the electronic data entries are flowing to them. Their bank account goes up. Goes in their checking account, they put it in their savings account. The bonds mature, we put it back in their checking account. They say, put it back in my savings account. And so we keep doing that. And meanwhile, the stuff keeps coming to us. And we think they're winning and we're losing. And we've got it backwards. The bond vigilantes aren't coming. This is a quote from the former Deputy Secretary of the US Treasury, who says, listen, there will always be a market for US government debt. The bond vigilantes have it backwards. There's always more demand for treasuries, for US government bonds, than there is available supply. The winners in any auction get to hold the treasuries, and the losers have to keep their money in a bank and bear bank risk. So don't worry about the day that we can't borrow, right, because markets shut us out. He's saying that's not going to happen. Well, what happened to Greece? Greece clearly got into trouble. Interest rates spiked, right? There was a default and restructuring and IMF bailouts and all this. What happened? Well, Greece gave up the drachma. They gave up their currency. And they adopted the euro, which doesn't come from Greece, okay? Italy, same thing. Portugal, same thing. Spain, the so-called pigs, everybody in the Eurozone. They turned themselves into users of the currency where they used to be issuers of the currency. And now Greece is like the state of Georgia, and Italy is like Idaho. Portugal is like Pennsylvania. You get the picture. They can't do today with the euro what they had the freedom to do when they had their own currency, and it's why they're in so much trouble. Okay? It's why Spain and Italy were perfectly fine in 1995. There was no debt crisis. But in 2010, 2011, with exactly the same amount of debt, it was a debt crisis. Because in 95, the debt was all denominated in their own currency and they could always pay. And in 2010, 2011, it was all denominated in euros, and I can't issue the euro. We're not like these guys, but we think we are. And they draw lessons about what's going to happen. We'll be like Greece. And so we have to have austerity now, spending cuts, higher taxes, all of this kind of stuff. We're drawing these lessons from watching what happened to them. What we should be doing is stop waiting around for the economy to somehow magically fix itself, or for the Fed to fix the economy. It's not going to happen. We have a deficit today that's falling too fast, and it's falling for the wrong reasons. It's not falling because we have a healthy economy, people are getting jobs in huge numbers, tax revenues going way up because income's up, and spending to support the unemployed is down. That's not why it's falling, primarily, right? We have to recognize today we should be doing the fiscally responsible thing and raising spending, or cutting taxes, or both, depending on your politics. But we're going in the opposite direction. We're focusing on budget outcomes when we should be focusing on economic outcomes. Okay? Remember what it's costing us. The estimate from the CBO is that by the year 2024, the financial crisis will have cost the US $24.6 trillion. $24.6 trillion by the year 2024. It's massive. Okay, we got all these people who want to work, not nearly enough jobs available for them. Our infrastructure is in total disrepair. If this was your report card, you'd probably be thrown out of Augustana. But this is our report card. This is our nation's report card. for our infrastructure, our ports, our railways, our bridges, our water treatment facilities, our hospitals. This is our infrastructure, and it gets a D+ grade overall. In the United States of America, and the civil engineers tell us we need to spend $3.6 trillion to get our infrastructure up to passing. It's atrocious. It's a crime. We've got all this spare capacity in the economy. We don't use the existing factories and machines nearly at their potential. We used to operate up here, around 90% of capacity. Now we're down here in the mid-70s. We have slack in the economy. We have people who want to work. We have no inflation on the horizon. And we have a president who tells us, on the one hand, there aren't enough customers. This is the problem. Companies are awash with cash. Profits are at record highs, and what businesses are missing are enough customers out there to prompt the demand to get them to spend and hire. Yes, but then he tells us we're out of money, so we can't get there. And balancing the budget should not be the goal. We have balanced the budget in the US in only 7 periods since the founding of this nation. Since 1776, we've had 7 periods where we have balanced the budget, run surpluses, and started to pay down debt. 6 of those 7 ended in a depression, not a recession, a depression. And the last one, the Clinton surpluses, ultimately gave us the Great Recession. Balancing the budget leads to terrible economic consequences. The budget is a tool. It's not an end in and of itself. It's a means to an end. So the government's power to adjust spending and taxes is like your ability to walk over and control the thermostat in your home, your apartment. If you're too hot, what do? You dial it down and cool off. If the economy is too hot, government should cut spending or raise taxes, depending on your politics. If the economy is weak and too cold, you get up and you turn the dial the other way. You cut taxes, you raise spending, and you let the budget go where it needs to go to achieve the proper macroeconomic goals, which are full employment and low inflation. Balance the economy, not the budget. That's the lesson. So thank you. I think there might be a little time for questions. Okay.